Today, I want to talk about the connection between breathwork and creativity. Now, the reason I'm even bringing this up is because both of these are very, very close to my heart. Been a musician my whole life, and music is my favorite thing. I discovered centering practices, breathwork ideally, and especially when I was in my 20s, and I found that they are absolutely perfect hand in hand. And I've been teaching and practicing for 12 plus years, haven't missed a single day. And I've been constantly working to weave the two together in a way that is both practical and enjoyable, right? Because sometimes spiritual practices aren't very fun, but they get you places. And I'm just like, how do we use these tools to make better music and make better art? Right? So I'm going to talk about three things today. The first is the chemicals involved in both creativity and breathwork. The second is the frequencies, right? The brain frequencies that are involved in both of these practices. And last but certainly not least, in fact, perhaps the most important, is the best practices that you can apply in order to implement these into your life and go out and make better music and make better art, right? So first and foremost, when you're doing breathing techniques, right? Especially some of these, right? These are some of the main ones that I found really make these happen for me. Right? So the first is the chemicals. Okay, so these are all the chemicals that are present when they look at clinical research when you do breathing techniques. Right? So the first, of course, serotonin. Serotonin regulates your mood. Right, and it's responsible for regulating memory and learning. And when you're in a creative state, they found that this chemical is very, very high. Right? There's a lot of these neurotransmitters in your brain. They're regulating all these things. I've noticed that after a really, really solid breathwork session, for some reason, my memory recall is a lot better. So when I'm on the decks mixing or, making a track, whatever, right? Trying to figure out creative combos, I'm a lot sharper, right? And it's because there is a massive flood of serotonin in my brain that has been released from my breathing practices, right? The second one is, of course, dopamine. Dopamine is a huge piece of creativity. Right? This is what regulates motivation, emotional arousal, right? Which is huge. If you're a musician or any sort of artist, the emotion is the energy and motion that we use as fuel and as superpower to push art out from our brains and bodies and out into the world. Right? Emotions are huge. Dopamine plays a huge role. It's also the regulator of reward and pleasure. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist. This is just the research that I've done, both in my own life, but also the research that has been proven to cross over both paths. Right. Also, in my own experience. Right. In my own experience, when I do these, I notice when I do breathing practices, I notice a very, very common feeling, right? When I'm in a really creative state, sometimes I can access it without it, but I notice that this is like a shortcut, right? And I notice that the same kind of mental states that I'm in when I'm here are the same mental states that I'm in after I do this, right? And dopamine is huge for that. I notice that I feel amazing after I create a beautiful piece of music, right? Something that really, really makes me feel good, something that I'm proud of, right? Flooded with dopamine. And we can actually reverse engineer that by jumping into this and feeling good already, and then jumping into the art, right? Then jumping into the musical session. Super important. Right? Noradrenaline and cortisol. Now, this is something that might not be as commonly known in the creative space, right? Noradrenaline. I put these two chemicals together because they're kind of similar in terms of the responses they create in our body. Noradrenaline and cortisol is, of course, fight or flight, or arousal, attention, and stress, right? Now, if you know anything about flow states, flow is created when you're faced with a challenge that's just a little bit outside of your comfort or out of your skill set. Right? I remember I was DJing a gig once on a rooftop, and it was I think my first rooftop gig, right? So I was a little nervous. The promoter who put me on just kind of threw me to the wolves. She was like, look, play a little hip hop, play some house. I'm primarily a house DJ, but I play all of it, right? And she was like, play a little hip hop, throw in some house, but do your thing. And there were tons of people there, and everyone was watching me because I'm the DJ, right? I was in the front and center. And it was my first time playing this rooftop gig, and I was a little nervous. Had a couple tequilas to like calm the nerves, and I was like still nervous, right? I had already planned my set. I've spent a ton of time and energy planning out my set. I got on the decks, and I just went to work, right? And I started mixing, and I got into my flow state fairly quickly, right? Quicker than I can remember. Like I remember very distinctly my brain like just like turned on, and I felt like in flow, and I was killing it, right? And like the rooftop was like, it's awesome, right? It was a great time. And I remember distinctly after my set, right? And this has happened many times since, but I remember this was like the first time where it was like, wow, like my brain is different. After this, I had so much energy, and it wasn't just from like me hyping up the crowd with the tunes. It was because my brain turned on in a certain way. There was a little bit of stress involved in my mix because it was my first time, and it was a little bit out of my skill set, right? Like I had mixed hip hop and house live on a rooftop in front of hundreds of people. It was stressful at the time. And because of that little bit of cortisol and that little bit of noradrenaline, right, pumping into my blood, I became more creative, and I killed my mix, right? So that's like the best example I can give you of these kind of chemicals being involved in creativity. And there's tons more examples that have happened since then, but that one like really sticks in my brain when I think about this, right? And then my favorite, right? Oxytocin. Right? I'm actually shooting this on Valentine's Day, so hopefully whoever you are, wherever you are, if you're watching this, you're getting a lot of this tonight, right? Oxytocin is the love, bonding, and trust hormone. It's my favorite. It's everybody's favorite. This is the chemical that's responsible for connection and cooperation. So I think the best example of this is when a mother is nursing her baby, right? This is like the epitome of bonding, right? This woman has given birth to her beautiful baby. She's nursing, she's looking at it, and she's just like flooded with oxytocin. This is like a woman's ultimate like birthright, right? Like they're fulfilling their role of being this beautiful mother, and they're just like, I don't know what it's like to be a mother, but I imagine it's like 100 times more fulfilling than like cuddling your dog or something like that, or cuddling your cat. Just like amazing connection, right? You feel this connection. Or when you're cuddling with your lover, right? Or you just finished a great lovemaking session, you feel that like warmth in your chest and your body, you're just connected to them. Another probably not as commonly known example of this is like at a football game, or like at a rally, like a political rally, right? When everyone's rallying, like cheering on the person on stage, the political leader, everyone's juiced to the gills with oxytocin, right? And the best example of this, which would relate to you, is like a rave or a concert when everyone knows the words, right? Everyone's jumping up and down to the same beat. That's the bonding hormone. There's a ton of other in play, but like this is like a great example. People just like juiced up, feeling bonded, feeling together, feeling this togetherness, right? This is a very, very common byproduct of awakening your heart chakra, right? You're awakening your heart because the heart is the universal solvent. Right? So when your heart wakes up and you feel this connection and this love and this bonding, oxytocin has been shown to be very prevalent in the brain, which of course translates to this, creativity. When you feel connected, when you feel that flow, it's amazing. Another really good example of this, right? So I was in a fraternity in college, and we had this event called pre-serenades, right? If you're familiar with Greek life, you know what I'm talking about. This is when the guys travel around, and I don't know sure how different chapters, but in our chapter, right, Fiji Alpha Nu, we would gather all the guys and we would go to the sororities and we would sing to them, right? Just like little fun songs, right? And in between the sorority houses were also other fraternities, right? And it's very competitive, right? In that space sometimes. And I remember, I just remember that particular day, and I was always in charge of like the pre-serenades and like the song. I was Greek sing chair, all that stuff. I was in charge of all that stuff. So I kind of rallied everyone together. And I remember that day I was feeling particularly just like super low energy and just over it, right? I've been studying and I was tired, and I didn't want to rally the people and like go do this. I wanted to just take a nap. And I remember we had particular songs we were singing and that we would sing per sorority and per fraternity. And we had everyone rallied, and I started like the cadence, right? And I started the singing and the chanting, and it was kind of like a call and response thing where you sing something and then the fraternity responds. And I remember just like the act of vocalizing, right, started to lift my spirits. And then I remember the fraternity responding to my call, and like just like the roaring of like all these like fraternity men around me, and like we were all just like building this energy and like screaming and shouting, and it was like we were building this energy, and the other fraternities would come out and they would, you know, cuss us out and flip us off, and we'd be like, you know, calling and responding. It was this like fun, weird, competitive chanting that we were doing. And I remember that this whole process lasted maybe an hour and a half, right? 2 hours. And I remember it was night and day the way I felt after this pre-serenades. I was high on life, right? I hadn't taken any drugs. I hadn't drank any substances, right? I didn't work out. I didn't take a nap. I was just rallying with my boys, right? And there was a very important piece here, which was like the breath, right? We were like shouting and speaking and chanting and calling and responding. So that combination of like the breath work of the songs combined with like the rallying of the boys, right? Oxytocin, right? And I felt so bonded with my boys, and I felt so much energy and juice. And I just remember looking around, everyone was in the best mood, right? So that's like another really, really powerful response that can happen when you apply these practices, right? Anyway, I could go on and on. I have tons of examples regarding how these chemicals play into like creativity, but I want to move on to point number 2, which is frequencies. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with this, but if you're not, I'm just a quick crash course on what this is like. So the highest frequency is gamma. We'll talk about that actually last. I want to actually start with beta. So when you perform breathing practices, in fact, beta is like the normal state, right? It's when you're like problem solving, you're, you know, trying to find directions. It's like the fastest frequently. It's like the most active, chattery frequency, right? Think about when there's like a lot of chatter in your mind. Anxiety lives here, right? If you're in beta for too long. Imposter syndrome lives here. If you're in beta too long, so for a lot of artists, this is a huge problem. Feeling imposter syndrome, feeling like you're not good enough, your art isn't good enough. This is beta brain, right? Imposter syndrome, feeling like you're not good enough to express yourself or be vulnerable with your art. Right? Once you start breathing, right, you drop down to alpha. Right? And this can happen from exercise as well, but breathwork like takes you there because breathwork directly affects the heart rate, and the heart rate directly affects the brain frequencies. So if you're breathing properly, it drops you into alpha, and you'll notice, amazing drawings here, right? The brain frequencies are starting to slow down. Alpha is like calm, cool, collect, alert, but focused, right? You've heard the term alpha male. Right? That is not like machismo, like biggest guy in the room. Alpha male literally is like the coolest, calmest, collect, focused, alert. Like it's a state of mind, right? It's not a status, right? Although it can be in the animal kingdom. But when it comes to brain frequencies, right? It's like how you are within yourself. You're centered, you're grounded, you're strong, right? This is alpha. Okay? Now, we keep doing this, keep working the patterns, keep working the breath, you drop to theta. I know theta is magic. Okay? This is where stuff really starts to happen. Theta is that really weird, often euphoric place between sleeping and waking. You have a lot of like hallucinations here and a lot of creative responses. I believe sleep paralysis lives here. And I know that's not the most pleasant topic for a lot of you if you've suffered from that. I've had some really weird experiences with sleep paralysis. But I remember one time, I was a lot younger. I must have been like 10, right? And I was laying on my friend's couch. And like I was kind of dozing off, but not really, still awake. And I remember just like hearing these weird voices like come to my head, not to get all creepy, right? But like, it was like, you ever seen Lord of the Rings? Right? How like the ring talks to Frodo, and it's like this weird, like, oh, she goes, like chanting, like kind of creepy, but like definitely like audible. Like, you know, you're hearing voices. And it was like voices mixed with chanting, mixed with like singing. And I could have sworn it was like blasting in the living room, right? But it was just a brain frequency. And I remember I like kind of snapped out of it, the voices disappeared. Right? I was back in, one of the higher frequencies. And I was like, whoa. And that was like the first time I remember distinctly changing brain frequencies. Right? Lots of inventors and artists live here. Right? Everyone's heard the famous example of Thomas Edison, right? The inventor of the light bulb. And he used to have this practice where he would lean up against a chair and he had these metal plates and these metal balls, and he would let himself doze off, and the balls would fall out of his hand, crash on the plates, make a loud noise, and it would snap him out of his he's about to doze off, it'd snap him out of it, and he'd be flooded with ideas. And he would write things down. This is why he's one of the greatest of all time, right? The inventor goat, this is because he knew how to manipulate theta. I actually just experienced theta this morning. I sat in my little dojo over there, and I did 3 rounds of power size, which we'll talk about here. And on the breath holds, I remember on the second round, I really started to build these juices up. And then on the third round is where I really popped off and really started to feel this flood of creativity. I could see connections between marketing and art and spiritual practices. I was just flooded with all these ideas and connections. And 20 minutes prior, I was sleepy, I was tired, I was kind of cranky, right? So I did this in the morning, and I was kind of over it. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna wake up and do this. Did my breathing practices, and I was so inspired that I actually made this video, right? Like, this is literally where I got the idea to make this video, is from this, and from this, and from this, right? So, flooded with creativity, right? All these chemicals came flooding in my brain, and I made something. I made this video, right? I created something, okay? Now, delta is, of course, the slowest, right? This is where deep sleep is, right? Deep rest, dream state, right? You could say when you're having these really deep dreams, apparently this is where delta is at. And again, not a neuroscientist, but from my experience, my research, this is how this works. Right? And there are breathing practices that can take you way down, right? Way down here, right? And then by accessing these different brain waves, you then move into creative states. So it's literally a shortcut to creativity. Okay? And the last one, of course, is gamma. Okay? Now, gamma is actually a higher and a faster brain frequency than beta, but it's like a peak experience. It's an ecstatic state. It's like a spiritual orgasm, right? It's like an orgasm in your head where you're just in ecstasy, right? I've had several moments in my life where I've reached gamma and there's just tears streaming down my face. I have goosebumps and chills, and like the hair on the back of my neck is standing up, and I'm just in ecstasy and awe of the universe and awe of myself and awe of God, my creator. And it's just like I'm in total union. It's beautiful. If you've never experienced gamma, highly recommend you try it out. And you can get there by being dedicated to a centering practice, especially a breathing practice, right? Good. So, point 1 is chemicals, point 2 is frequencies, point 3 is the practices, okay? How do we get there, right? So, power size, I'm gonna start with this one. It's probably one of my favorites, right? I think everybody at this point has probably heard of Wim Hof, right? Right? Similar to this, right? Except I like to add a sigh, because the sigh tells your nervous system it's super relaxed. I also notice it kind of gets me a little bit more high, and it gets me a little bit more deep, right? It's also really nice if you're doing this in a group. The sigh like lets other people know that they're safe. And just like the sound, I don't know, something about that little subtlety of adding the sigh. See, even now, just doing those 3 breaths, I'm already like starting to shift into a different brain frequency. Power size are powerful, right? 30 to 50 breaths. Do the breath holds. We'll talk about breath holds in a sec. Yeah, amazing, right? This is like the staple, like one of my staples of like accessing creative states. Hit 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds, right? Even just 1 round, right? I remember one time I was really sick. I was in Paris. I was traveling alone, and I got really sick. I was at a club. I don't know what happened, right? Just got sick. And I was playing a gig there, actually. And I could barely walk, right? And I went back to my hostel. I sat up and I forced myself to do, I think it was like 3 or 4 rounds of this. And I kid you not, in like 30 minutes, right, maybe less, I combined this with some chanting that I do and some meditation. I was on the moon. I felt so much better, right? All these chemicals just flooding into my brain. I felt so good, and I crushed my set, right? Obviously, because I felt great and I overcame a biological stress response. It was amazing. I'll never forget that day. So power size are powerful. And the second one I want to talk about is alternate nostril breathing, okay? Plugging one nostril, breathing in, holding, breathing out the other, inhale through the right, holding, and then exhale out the left. That's 1 round, right? That's like a typical alternate nostril breath. In yoga, or in Sanskrit, they call this nadi shodhana, which means nerve cleansing, oddly enough, right? You're cleansing your nerves and you're dropping into a parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest. You feel safe for the energy to move up into your heart and actually create something beautiful, right? Alternate nostril. By the way, if you want access to these practices in real time, the links to all my practices are in the description on this video. So if you want to practice with us, access creative states, hit the link in the description and it'll take you to our community, okay? The other one is 3-part breathing. 3-part breathing is basically where you isolate the different lobes. So there's the middle, there's the abdominal, right, the thoracic, and the clavicular. By kind of isolating each of these and adding breath holds, you start to wake up the nervous system and actually wake up the chakras in a way that will just blast your nervous system with creative energy. Amazing. Super, super low exertion, right? If you're sick or tired or whatever, you still want to do a breathing practice. Wonderful, wonderful way to kind of get your strength back. And it's weird when I do this, right? Because it's like working all the muscles from the inside that I would normally work when I hit a workout, like when I lift weights. I feel the same release that I feel after a workout, but I haven't lifted any weights. It's like an internal workout, but the same nerves are targeted and hit because you're working out from the inside, right? If that makes sense. Like when you're lifting like heavy squats or heavy weight, your muscles are expanding, or the lungs are expanding, but the muscles are contracting. So you're feeling this tension, right? And then this release happens as a result. You release tension. You can achieve that same release by hitting your 3-part breathing, okay? The last one, which is my favorite, this is like the cherry on top, are the breath holds, right? And I'm going to be making separate videos on all these practices. And like I said, all these practices have their own separate trainings in our community, right? But breath holds are so powerful, right? When you hold your breath, it kind of like pops the lid off, right? And all of these chemicals flood at once, right? It's so such an amazing experience, right? When you hold your breath, you unlock the flow of hidden energy in the body. Right? The yogis talk about this. And then all of these chemicals flood in excess. And there's a few different kinds of breath holds, right? There's the internal breath hold where you hold the breath in. And then there's the external where you hold the breath out. And then there's like a third, which is like a spontaneous breath hold, I think, if I'm interpreting that correctly. But that happens on its own, right? That happens after like a really, really dedicated practice to your breathing. And it just kind of happens on its own. And it's just like your breath is suspended. Kundalini immediately moves up into your brain and you have one of these, right? Little brain gasms. Right? So anyway, to tie this all together, right? Creativity is something that can be accessed. Right? There's formulas for it. And through my 12 plus years of studying these practices, I found different formulas that just take you right to it. Right? So if you're feeling lethargic or you are not feeling like you can access the creative states that you'd like to, you're not making the music you want to make or the art you want to make or whatever, right? Everything is a creative act. Right? I'm just talking musically because music is my passion. Right? Try this out, right? Try these out. Join our community, right? Link below will take you right to it. And then I wanted to just kind of talk about this, right? And tie it all together with this. So this is the upside down triangle in Tantra, which is my kind of lineage. They talk about femininity feminine essence, or creativity as being a feminine force, right? Which makes total sense, right? Creativity feels very nurturing. It feels very feminine. This is the universal tantric symbol for creativity, right? And it can be accessed through centering practices. Right? So anyway, that all came to me this morning after I did my practice, and I wanted to share it. So I hope this was valuable for you. If you found some value in this, you want to join our community and engage in some of these best practices, hit the link in the description, as I said. And if you dig the vibe, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.